Welcome back to the Green Beans Go channel. It's your host, me, and this is one of the most important videos I feel I have ever made, and it also could be one of the most boring in terms of content that I have ever made because we're going to really get into the nitty-gritty of these books and how they price different parlays, all around the idea of correlation in same game parlays. So why am I making this video? Why did I feel like it was worth my time and your time? It's mainly because we have to eat what the books serve us, and they are pushing same game parlays more than ever. You see it on every book. You see promos for them on every book. They're the first thing that pops up in terms of the suggested bets, right? And why are books doing this? If books are pushing you something, if books are encouraging you to bet something, you as a sports bettor should be warned by that. It is very simple. There's higher juice on these bets. In other words, the books can charge you more for every leg you add. And it also just promotes bad habits, recreational, right? Of course, parlays are bad bets in the long term, but they aren't always tempting to sports bettors because it's hard, or it was hard at one time, to watch 6 games at a time and keep track of all your legs. Well, now, you know, on Thursday night, the Cincinnati Bengals are playing the Baltimore Ravens, and they just scored 70 points 2 weeks ago. So why don't we load up some legs from this game, tune in on Thursday night and have a good time? Yeah, that's awesome for recreational betting. And sometimes recreational betting means losing money long term. So that is why I think this video is important, because I want you guys to understand what you are doing when you are doing it. The second part, and maybe the more optimistic part, reminds me of this fishing proverb, right? Feed a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. If you know how books operate, even if you don't care how they operate, you can make more money long term. Just being aware of what you are betting and how it is calculated can help you make smarter, we'll call them investments, even though, again, a lot of you are just doing this for fun, and that's totally okay. I still think this information is valuable. This video is going to focus solely on NFL parlay slips, but keep in mind this applies across all sports: college football, hockey, baseball, NBA. So the examples provided will be NFL, but understand it is farther reaching than just that. So first, we're going to talk about positive correlation. What is it? Positive correlation are any legs in a same game parlay that are more likely to occur based on other legs in that parlay. So if we look on the left here, this is a traditional parlay, or a hypothetical traditional parlay. Let's say Denver's playing Minnesota and Philadelphia is playing Indianapolis. If you wanted to make a 2-leg parlay of Minnesota and Indianapolis, the results of either of these games are not dependent on the results of the other games. In other words, if Minnesota wins the game against Denver, it has no bearing or effect on if the Colts win or lose against the Eagles. Duh, right? Like, that's pretty obvious. Now, in a correlated same game parlay, the opposite is the case. If Mahomes has over 225 passing yards, it is more likely that Kelsey will also have over 60 receiving yards in a vacuum. Like, I understand there are differences in that, but in terms of black and white mathematical fact, all right, Kelsey's yards depend on Patrick Mahomes' passing yards. So this parlay would be what we call correlated. Now, a traditional parlay, if both of these legs are minus 110, would pay out $265, or a $10 bet would pay you $36.50. This is standard. This is how the market operates. It doesn't matter if you're on Fanduel, DraftKings, or ESPN. Minus 110 and minus 110 in 2 separate games will pay you about $265, or it should pay you exactly $265. That's not going to waver. However, on this example, the correlated same game parlay, now we get into books calculating it differently. So I went ahead and plugged this exact parlay in on 3 different books, and you see a difference across the board. 172 on FanDuel, 164 on DraftKings, and 150 on ESPN Bet. Now, keep in mind, not only does it vary by book, it varies in terms of what fair value is. Fair value, uncorrelated, neutral value of a minus 110 and a minus 110 is plus 265. But when you factor in that Kelsey is more likely to go over when Mahomes goes over, both of these legs, although they are minus 110, get you significantly less in terms of money earned. Now, first of all, books price correlation differently, as you can see. And it's a necessary evil, guys. Like if books were paying you $265 or fair value on this, we as the sports bettor would have a huge advantage because we know when Mahomes goes over, Kelsey is more likely to go over and vice versa. All right. So I don't want you to look at this and say, well, that's ridiculous. I'm never betting a same game parlay again, because there is hope. But understand this is kind of a necessary evil. All right. So let's take a look at some examples here. And these are examples from last night's game. And we're going to use a different game on our negative correlation examples. But I just want to get you guys aware of kind of how these books think and how maybe a sports bettor would think. So this first one right here, Derrick Henry touchdown, Zay Flowers touchdown, Ravens to win, and the over. Well, if Henry and Flowers are both scoring touchdowns, it is more likely that the Ravens win since these are two Baltimore Ravens players. And if these two are scoring touchdowns, it's more likely that the game goes over on the total because we have a guaranteed 14 points from this. All right. This on Fanduel pays $4.96. On DraftKings, it pays $4.50. And if you plugged all of the odds that were given for these legs into a fair value parlay calculator, you get $7.70. Now, I'm not saying that these are unfair prices because, again, suspicious activity has been blocked. Thank you. So kind of you to block that suspicious activity. You know what's suspicious activity? How they're pricing these. Because there's really no way to tell how books are pricing correlation. And in this case, positive correlation. But in terms of fair value, you're getting a significant knock to your price. Looking at this one over here. Lamar Jackson, 2 passing touchdowns, Deontay Johnson and Zay Flowers both to score. This comes out to $9.50. DraftKings has it at $8.50, so, a whole plus 100 less. Fair value of this is $1,500, which is significantly less than these numbers. I added this little caveat in because I also think this is an important aside. If you take out Lamar 2 passing touchdowns, it's $8.70. So it goes down on a $10 bet. It goes down $8. Okay, a $10 bet would pay you $95. A $10 bet would pay you $87. I say all this to kind of give you a warning. This kind of repetitive or redundant nature in your same game parlay is probably not worth it long term, because if Deontay Johnson and Zay Flowers are both scoring, yeah, it's more likely that Lamar has 2 passing touchdowns, but there's also a case where Lamar Jackson gets injured. One of these guys recovers a fumble in the end zone. Maybe there's an end around or a reverse, a rush play where they score. It's not worth it to me to add a redundant leg of Lamar Jackson 2 passing touchdowns, because if Zay Flowers, who is a rushing threat, gets a sweep, right, and scores, and Lamar only throws 1 passing touchdown, well, now you just cost yourself what could be $87 because you were chasing $95, okay? So keep in mind that sometimes you are not being rewarded for adding those extra legs when other legs in your parlay are kind of getting paid for on the back end, all right? Last one we'll talk about as far as positive correlation goes, and this one's huge, right? Fair value on this is almost 12-1, and you're getting less than half of that, almost a third of what fair value is. So Lamar Jackson overpassing, Joe Burrow overpassing, over on the total, and Zay Flowers over on receiving yards. As you can see here, there's multiple instances of positive correlation. There's the Zay Flowers going over and the Lamar Jackson going over, but there's also the idea that if both quarterbacks are going over their passing yards, then we can expect the ball to be moving up the field at a fast pace and more points to be scored, hence the over 52.5. Okay, so these type of parlays, I would just recommend, we'll talk about my advice, okay? Positive correlation juice, it is a necessary evil. Like, books have to operate this way or they're going to lose their cheeks, all right? Books would die without it. But my advice is I would avoid stacking related games in a same game parlay or related legs in a same game parlay as much as possible. The bottom line is you're going to be giving up more than you are getting back. So less is more in terms of positive correlated same game parlays. Line shop, guys. Be at different books. Make sure if you care about making money long term, you have 5 or 6 or all the available books to you, at least the ones that allow you to bet with your limits. I get that like MGM, I'm not going to be able to bet a same game parlay at MGM for anything worth a buck. But it's important to kind of look around how these books price correlation. Use boosts to combat juice. If you are set on doing a positive correlated bet where you're going to get punished for it, use some of these promo and profit boosts that books are giving out to at least get back up to even or neutral, but stay away from positive correlation as much as possible. And I know that's counterintuitive. I know that's frustrating. I know that doesn't make sense, but I'm telling you, the punishment that they're giving you is not worth the reward that you could see on the back end. The juice is not worth the squeeze. Let's talk about negative correlation, or as it's sometimes called, reverse correlation. This is when any legs in the same game parlay are less likely to occur based on other legs. So in other words, the parlay itself kind of contradicts itself, right? So if we look at our example from the traditional parlay, we have Vikings and Colts winning on separate fields, different time slots. It's going to pay 265. But if we look at a case with Mahomes again, let's say he goes over 225 passing yards and Kelsey goes under 60 receiving yards. Well, now FanDuel is giving you plus 270. DraftKings is giving you 3-1, and ESPN, in this instance, which was paying you the worst for positive correlation, is now paying you the best for negative correlation at plus 320. This goes back to the idea of line shopping, all right? So fair value on 2 minus 110 props is 265. We're getting some negative correlation here on minus 110 props, and we do have FanDuel, which is kind of pricing this fair, right? Which is kind of counterintuitive. And maybe FanDuel's algorithm says there's actually no correlation in a quarterback going over and a receiver, or in this case, a tight end going under, which I don't necessarily believe. So they may not be rewarding you as much as they should. DraftKings at 3 and ESPN bet at 3.2. Okay, so that is just a quick example of how, and if we were to go back to the positive correlation, you see almost a doubling of the price. All books price negative correlation differently, same as positive correlation, as we were just talking about. So here's a very simple, and I mean a blindly simple example of negative correlation. 2 legs. DeAndre Hopkins to score 2 touchdowns, but him to have under receiving yards. That is counterintuitive. That makes our brain go, how is that likely to occur? Well, Kansas City may have some short fields. Maybe they force some turnovers on the Denver Broncos in their own territory, and so the length of field that they have more often than not is short. Maybe DeAndre Hopkins is only getting targeted in the red zone, so he gets the 2 touchdowns, but outside of that, he's not really involved in the game. FanDuel is pricing this at plus 9,049, okay? So a $10 bet would win $900. That's pretty good, right? DraftKings and ESPN, funny enough, and this is kind of, again, an aside that I wasn't really aware of, they're both pricing this at exactly 50-1. To me, that screams they have a maybe lazier algorithm, one that could be taken advantage of in some instances, but also maybe one that's punishing you way too hard for any sort of positive or negative correlation, because the odds that 2 different books with 2 different sets of lines, 2 different coding styles comes out with the exact same price is a bit alarming to me. Fair value of this, and these are using FanDuel's lines 16-1 and minus 114, where the respective prices of these legs comes out to 30-1. So you're getting triple the value on fair value for these standard legs based on the negative correlation that FanDuel expects in this one. But we see this every week. Every week we see a guy get, Terry McLaurin. It happened the other week. He had 2 receptions for 2 touchdowns, like 16 yards, right? That is an example, a real life example of negative correlation. We'll look at one that's a little more intense. Stay with me on this if you can. Kareem Hunt to score, Travis Kelce to score. So 2 Kansas City Chiefs to score. The Broncos to cover the spread. So the Broncos to keep the game close, but the game to go under. All right. FanDuel's giving you 45-1. ESPN is giving you 22-1, and DraftKings is about what FanDuel is. I mean, that is abysmal, right? Like, this is why you line shop, guys. This is bad. And again, they were giving you the best odds on Mahomes passing yards over, Kelsey receiving yards under. So in that way, the reverse correlation was rewarding you compared to FanDuel. But in this case, it's not. So that is why it's important to play around and kind of manipulate these things. So fair value, again, it's 14-1. You're getting, triple that. So here is why this is sort of counterintuitive or unlikely. This is guaranteeing that the Chiefs will get 14 points provided Harrison Butker does his job and hits the extra points. So let's say that the Chiefs find another touchdown and field goal in the game, which is probably realistic, right? That means they end the game with 24 points. So in order for the Broncos to cover this plus 7.5, they have to score 17 points. So the final score of this game would be 24-17, provided that the Chiefs get 10 extra points somewhere in the game, which is a total of 41 points. So we're getting the under by 1 point. We're getting the Broncos spread by half a point, or both of these by half a point, and both of these guys are scoring. It's unlikely, right? Like That's why you're getting rewarded, because the amount of outcomes of all of this happening are significantly less. They get an extra field goal, you're done because you can't hit the over. Broncos get an extra field goal. Congrats, they cover easier, but you don't get the under. That is why it is paying you so much. Now, this is another kind of side note. After I belch, sorry. There may be an instance where a book has more favorable lines but pays less due to their same game parlay algorithm. So if we look at the DeAndre Hopkins example, and these are made up numbers, but I want you to understand the sentiment of this. 2 touchdowns on one book may be 16-1, his under 50.5 maybe minus 110, and the parlay's paying out 50-1. Well, on this book over here, his 2 touchdowns is less, right? It's worse than this book. The under yards is the same, but it's giving you 55-1, right? These are examples of you can't just look at the individual lines. The way the books calculate them together matters in tandem as compared to just them as standalone props, all right? So negative correlation is, in my opinion, the best way to win long-term at same game parlays, which may be stressful, right? It may stress you out to think, well, I got to come up with things that are counterintuitive and unlikely to happen to make money. Yeah, you do. So here's my advice for negative correlation. I would suggest, and what I do is I map out a game script. And I start very basic, right? Do I like the game to go over or under? And if I like the game to go under, are there any guys I like to score? Because now I have a touchdown guaranteed, but the total going under. Now those things are kind of at odds with each other, but still it happens every week. 50% of games in the NFL go under and touchdowns are still scored, right? Who do I like to win the game? Let's say I like the Chiefs to win the game. Well, is there anybody? Thank you for blocking suspicious activity again. I appreciate that. Is there anybody on Denver who I like to score a touchdown? So if the Chiefs are going to win, it's likely that Denver scores. Well, who's scoring for them? And how can I use that reverse correlation to my benefit? So play around with different ideas. Think about how games go. Look at box scores of past games and say, what's weird? Like, what is counterintuitive in these games, right? Like last night, Jamar Chase, 3 touchdowns, 260 yards. Joe Burrow, 400 passing yards. And the Ravens won the game, right? So is there a situation where you think, I like the Ravens to win, but I like Jamar Chase to torch them? How can I plug that in? How can I make the books pay me for that? So my overall advice for negative correlation is learn what fair value is in your eyes. You have to be able to say the book is giving me this price, but do I think that matches the likelihood of this event happening? And if you believe the likelihood is more favorable than the number they're giving you, you should bet it. And if you think, I kind of expected Mahomes over Kelsey under to be paying about 4-1, and it's paying 2.5-1, I'm going to skip that, right? You have to get to a place where you're comfortable kind of pricing these on your own. So what is the bottom line of all of this whole 20-minute video? Okay, the first is that you need to probably adapt. If you're going to do this for real, you need to understand that books are going to push same game parlays. It's not going anywhere, and they're probably going to adjust pricing. So, this is something we've seen before. There were different edges or opportunities where people were capitalizing on the reverse correlation, and books have adapted to those certain things and said, well, we were paying you too much for that. We're going to scale that back, okay? So just keep being aware, and that's why it's so important to understand what you believe fair value is, because as these books develop and eventually get so selfish that they stop rewarding us for certain things, you need to be able to say, well, that is no longer a plus EV bet to myself. And we're not talking about plus EV right now. People may disagree and say, well, there's a way to calculate it no matter what, whatever. Second thing, promo. Try to limit your same game parlay action to only promo-based plays. I do not play same-game parlays unless Fanduel is giving me a 30% boost. DraftKings is giving me a risk-free bet. ESPN is giving out a ton of profit boosts lately, okay? I would try to limit to only times you're getting an extra boost on top of it, and then keep your legs pretty small. Like I'm talking 2 to 3 leg parlays, all right? And the last thing is experiment. Figure some things out. Get in there. You got some time. You got 20 minutes. Play around. See if you can and pick things that are counterintuitive that really pay out in a way that is realistic but also generous, and keep your mouth shut about it. For crying out loud! Stop posting it on Twitter, right? And the example I'm talking about is last year, there was somebody who was doing receiver yards over and receiver receptions under. So in other words, pick out players who are going to likely get big plays but not get a ton of targets. And we were seeing insane tickets with that. And what has FanDuel done? They've gone by and they've said, okay, we'd be paying too much for receiver yards over and receptions under. We're gonna nuke that a little bit. We're gonna, and it's inevitable, right? People are always going to share an edge for clout, for more paid subscribers in their Discord, right? Like I'm used to it. I'm done talking about it. It happens. But my advice to you is share it with your group chat buddies who aren't going to go tout it online and ruin the edge for you, because your edge long term is going to be more important than your clout online. Okay. Thank you guys for coming by. I hope you learned something. If you learned something, write a comment, leave a like, kiss somebody on the lips today. We'll see you next time.